Hi, this is Brian with Turning Leaf Realty Group here in Front Royal, and we're here today with Tony from LUX Foundations. We're just going to talk a little bit about the state of our industry. So how did you get into foundation work in the first place?
So, well, prior to this, I was actually in the Marine Corps, and I was an engineer there. So I just always had a fascination with building, construction, everything. And it's kind of funny because something that ties in with that, the first class that I remember getting was a class on drainage. And I remember the instructor saying up front, like right from the start, nobody thinks about drainage. He's like, let's go into the class. And ever since then, that has always stuck with me, that nobody ever thinks about drainage. Like, you know, you're living on a mountain, all that water's coming down that mountain to your house. Why didn't the builder think about that? You know, like why didn't, but anyways, getting out of the military, I wanted to do something with my hands. I didn't really care if it was just digging holes or whatever. Came across this job posting working for LUX Foundation Solutions. I had interviewed for a couple other construction companies, and you know, sometimes you run into people and you're just kind of like, I don't know if this guy's going to pay me, because you don't know. You kind of get some weird vibes or something. This one, right from the interview, Alex, the owner, he said, you know, I really think you'd be good, you know, doing this, then a year from now doing this. He just laid out, you know, year-long plans for me from the start, from talking to him for 10 minutes. He had a plan for just kind of everybody in the company. And I was just like, you know what, this guy, he knows what he's doing. He knows kind of where he wants his company going, and everything that he has said, you know, sometimes the timelines shift a couple months, but it's all happened. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't really, truthfully, honestly, interested in doing foundation repair, but working for them and working in this company, I've just found a fascination with construction methods that I'd never even heard of, using push piers, helical piers, just structural stuff that I thought were only available in the commercial world, but they're available residentially too, to repair houses economically, you know, not breaking the bank to repair somebody's home. Like foundation repair, it's never cheap, but I mean, you don't want the cheapest option to repair what's going to hold your house 24/7, 365 days a year. So
For the life of the structure.
yeah, exactly.
It almost sounds like, did you play with Legos and erector sets a lot as a kid?
Definitely. I was the one that took all of my toys apart. So I found my dad's screwdriver, took every toy apart, put it back together. Sometimes it always worked, sometimes it didn't. So it was just the nature of me.
That makes sense. Yeah. Okay, can you tell me a little bit about the services that LUX offers to its clients?
Yeah, so we do structural repair, waterproofing, and crawl space encapsulations. The structural repair, that's where it gets into some of those fun kind of off-the-wall technologies that you don't even know exist, like push piers, helical piers, which I say those things and most people are just like, I don't even know what that means. But it's basically just a pier that goes into the earth.
It's a giant screw jack, isn't it?
Yeah, basically either a giant screwdriver or a giant nail that's going in and holding your house up, in layman's terms, I guess. But also like bowing walls. One of the things we use is carbon fiber, which I remember growing up, carbon fiber, I think that was just like Corvettes and, you know, high-end cars use carbon fiber. I was like, I don't even know what that is. But
yeah, supercars. So
yeah.
Expensive ones.
Yeah, but I mean, they're expensive in cars, but for a foundation, it's actually a pretty cost-effective solution compared to using steel or even just the labor to carry steel into your house. Mm-hmm. I could use this lightweight carbon fiber, put it on there. Our engineer loves it because you're getting a perfect bond onto that wall. So it's not like a steel I-beam where it's rigid, straight, and your wall's kind of got some movement to it. Mm-hmm. So it's a good, you know, just random technology that we get to use that most builders don't even know exists. So a little bit of an education barrier when we start talking to like new construction or other builders, like, hey, we should use this. Oh, I didn't even know that was an option. So,
of course, the two questions that always come up in a client's mind have to be, how long is it going to take to fix my problem? And the biggie, how much is it going to cost us?
Okay. The horrible answer that I have to give all the time to that question is, it depends. But I would say typically our projects are about a week long. When it comes to like a structural project or even a basement waterproofing, most of them are about a week. Sometimes it's a little longer, sometimes it's shorter, depending on what we're doing. Budget-wise, that's always something that's tough, because one of the things that I open up with customers to is, what is your budget? And they never want to tell me. Because they think that I'm going to lose my cards if I tell them my budget, because now he's just going to charge me that much. It's just, sometimes it's not that. I just need to figure out, like, okay, what realistically can I do for your house? Sometimes I can't do the whole basement waterproofing, but I could treat this area that's really bad. And then maybe, a couple years down the road, you build some equity in the house. Now let's do this other area. Now you can finish this space or something like that. I don't like piecemealing projects, but, I'm realistic. I probably couldn't afford doing my whole basement either, so I got to come into it with that realistic perspective. So, long-winded answer to, sometimes projects can be in the range of 10 to 20,000 when it comes to, waterproofing to structural projects, but we could also do some stuff that's maybe just a couple $1,000s to make the house work for now, or get you going.
As a realtor, one of the things that I always recommend to a client who's purchasing any kind of property is to get an inspection done. And the kind of things we get back on inspections vary from really, really minor to what could potentially be major. And when it's something major, that means it's roof or foundation normally. So the kind of things that'll either flood a house or make it fall down.
Oh, yeah.
And you're the specialist in the foundations. So what's the kind of things that you tend to see that people would what's the kind of problems that you see that people should be worried about, or maybe not worried about?
Okay. Yeah, I definitely recommend an inspection. I know there was that height where people were waiving them because they were just trying to buy houses at that moment. If you're comfortable with that, that's one thing, but just understand, you may have some problems down the road that you just didn't even foresee.
Yeah, you have to have some risk tolerance to waive an inspection on a big investment like a building.
Absolutely. So, and I would say the three most expensive things in your house: your roof, your HVAC system, and your foundation. All of those are going to come with some pretty high ticket bills when it comes to paying for them, to either build them up front or to repair them. And some of the things we definitely see is just all of it stems from lack of maintenance, is just where the water goes. So the water's all hitting that roof, it's going into those gutters, going into the downspouts, and then where does it go? So the three things that I always preach in all of our little marketing videos and everything else is clean your gutters, extend your downspouts, and grade the soil as much as you can to push water away from the house. If you do those three things, 90% of the time, structural problems, water problems kind of go away. I just use 90% loosely, but that's like the best upkeep you can do for a home when it comes to foundation, when it comes to water intrusion, settlement, anything like that. So.
Okay, one of the things that we see a lot around in this area, of course, is a lot of the houses are older. They were built in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And a lot of times they have water intrusion that has been getting into these basements because they weren't sealed properly, or because they were built in areas where maybe there was water running through the ground or even over the ground.
Yeah.
And when you have a house that has had water intrusion in it for decades, is there anything that can be done to expect to be able to remediate that problem, or is this just something they have to live with?
Yeah, that's one that's always tough, especially when it comes to first-time home buyers, because they don't understand that residential construction and just houses in general, they're not built in a vacuum. They're built in real-world conditions. Houses were built in the 30s, 40s, completely different standard of construction compared to now. Like, even building code wasn't really adhered to too much then. Or even in some of these areas, they weren't really houses. They were like getaways for somebody, like a cabin up in the mountains. And then now somebody's added a kitchen and all this stuff, like, oh, I'm going to live here permanently. this building was never designed to do that. But when it comes to like some of those basements where you have that water intrusion that's been going on for decades, first I would start with that exterior stuff, your gutters, your downspouts, grade that soil. That'll help most of the problem. Just understand that you're still probably going to get moisture in that space, especially with like some of those really old stone foundations, where it's not a poured concrete wall, something that's kind of been waterproofed in the past. You still may get moisture in there. There's ways to mitigate it with dehumidifiers to try and dry out the space. They're kind of like the real upgrade level would be to do a whole basement drainage system. They can be done in like stone foundation houses and everything.
Is this something that's applied on the outside of the foundation, or is this going to be done on the inside?
There's two ways to do it. Typically, for a house that's existing, we'll do the inside, just cost-wise, because if you do it on the exterior, to dig out the entire exterior, that's just a ton of labor. So it'll be, triple, 4 times, 5 times the cost of doing something on the inside. Sometimes you kind of have to do it like in conjunction with some exterior work as well, so that the inside system's not just constantly running, and then you're replacing sump pumps or stuff like that. But depending on the house, it's all house dependent. But those inside systems, they can be applied to an older home. I would definitely recommend it if you're planning on like finishing that basement, because if you're going to put up framing, drywall, everything else, there's no sense in doing it, especially in an old home where you don't really know, hey, am I going to get a bunch of water in here? You're going to have to pay for all that framing and drywall twice to rip it all out, then put in a system, then put up all your framing and drywall again. So it's just, to me, it's not worth it. And I've even told my wife several times before we finish our basement, we're putting in a drainage system. Like, we've never seen water, but I don't even want to take the risk. Like, that's, $20,000, $30,000, depending on how much you finish that space, it's just not worth it.
So now, are those systems effective at getting the humidity levels down so that we're not having to contend in the future with problems dealing with, well, I know you're not a mold expert, but any kind of biological growth on the walls? Things that can cause health issues for people?
Absolutely. So we'll seal up the walls. We use a vapor barrier on that. That kind of, so basically any water that comes through the wall will get trapped behind the vapor barrier, go down into a drain system, and then to a sump pump. So it does help with humidity changes. Sometimes we do, especially with older homes, just because they're so air leaky, we will add a dehumidifier in the space. If somebody doesn't want to upfront pay the cost of having a dehumidifier, I always recommend just get a monitor and just see what your humidity is like in the summer. And 60% and higher humidity is kind of like the margin where you can get mold and mildew growth. Below 60%, you're typically okay, but you may have fluctuations. If you have a basement walkout, you open the door, humidity is going to rush in, so now you're going to spike up. But as long as it's not consistently staying, 65, 70% humidity in your basement over summer, then you're going to see some issues when it comes to rot, mildew, mold, stuff like that.
One of the things that I see fairly frequently is not every house has a basement. A lot of them are built on crawl spaces or slabs. And with crawl spaces particularly, what are the kind of things that I should be looking for as a homeowner that might indicate whether or not the house was prepared properly versus not? Because I know they're supposed to have a vapor barrier down, but is there a proper way to install a vapor barrier? And
so crawl spaces are tough. They, even like building code to date, they still allow vented crawl spaces. We can go down a weird history lesson, but basically we started using newer lumber, which was growing a little bit faster, so it couldn't absorb moisture as much as older lumber. And people started realizing, okay, we're getting water in these spaces, like crawl spaces or like those stone foundations. So how do we dry this out? Hey, let's pop some vents in here. Now air will passively come in and dry out the space. That was the thought. There was a study done in North Carolina, I forget the date, it was 2000s, and they took basically a row of houses on one street, did a closed crawl space and a vented. The vented crawl spaces, the humidity stayed pretty consistent with outside humidity. So letting in that passive air was actually just
Because you're letting in the outside.
Yeah, you're letting in humidity. So the closed crawl space was definitely ideal. So it's tough when it comes to like the sale of a house, because there's what is the requirement by code, but then also what's the damage that's happened to the house since it's been there for 30 years or whatever it is. And that's when it comes to that risk assessment from that home buyer, you know, or even the appraiser, if they have a say in, you know, what they're going to mortgage for that house. Sometimes it's just the requirement of installing a vapor barrier, which definitely helps, because now, you know, water from the ground isn't just vaporizing up into your wood framing. But we do something called crawl space encapsulations, and that's basically taking that vented crawl space or just a traditional crawl space and enclosing it, putting a dehumidifier in there. But that involves like a drain system, a sump pump, vapor barrier on the floor, on the walls, sealing everything, basically making that another area of living space, if that makes sense. Like it has to be part of the condition system of the home.
So it sounds like we just start from the assumption moisture is going to get in. So it's a matter of reducing the amount getting in, but then also removing what is there.
Yeah, exactly. So you're going to get moisture, you're going to get water, groundwater, whatever is going to be down there. Some areas are a little drier. Say your house is on like a hilltop. You know, water's going to drain away, so you're not going to absorb too much in there, but you're still going to be contending with humidity. And maybe you don't see the problem now or in 5 years, but the more humidity gets in there, the more it's going to break down that wood fiber, and then your wood's going to start falling apart.
Yeah, I mean, as a realtor, I don't always crawl underneath the houses.
Yeah.
Because that's the inspectors are our expert, you guys are our experts, so that's really y'all's job. But, you know, of the ones that I have been in those that seemed dry, don't have any evidence of, you know, effervescence on the walls where, you know, you have these, you know, almost stalagmites growing from moisture coming through, and things look real good. And then I've been in others that it was literally raining on me because the moisture was condensing on ductwork and coming down in droplets onto the floor, causing puddles.
I've had raining crawl spaces. They're pretty gross. So I would say that's probably the biggest problem, is the crawl space is kind of like that underneath, out of sight, out of mind, so nobody goes in them. So they don't realize that this is actually like a really bad environment that I'm living on top of. And especially if it's got that mold and mildew growth, all that air has to go somewhere. It's going up into where you're living. So you're breathing in some of that stuff. So if you have constant like chronic cough and just health concerns, you might want to take a look inside that crawl space to see, you know, what am I living on top of? Am I living off of just a mold infested area or something? Don't want to scare anybody, but you know, you got to go down there.
Yeah, that's always the line that we try to run when we're doing inspections, is I want people to be fully informed of what they're getting into, but I don't want to scare them unnecessarily.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's just, you know, different houses, different construction methods, and it's tough. It's a little tough because your car doesn't come with, or your house doesn't come like a car manual where it tells you everything about it. You kind of have to educate yourself on, you know, what are some of these construction methods, or what am I buying? You know, the average consumer really doesn't know. There's not a whole lot of knowledge out there for them to just go in and just buy a house. They usually buy that first house, realize all the problems, and then they're like, I need to buy a second house now because I want to get the hell out of this place.
Let me sell my problems to somebody else.
Yeah, exactly.
So you don't want to be the guy that buys that.
Yeah, but that is the point, like where it does come into value, having that home inspector who at least has some educated eye to say, hey, this doesn't look right. You may want to get a mold guy out here. You may want to get a foundation or a structural engineer, or, you know, whatever, to really assess this thing, make sure what you're buying is right for you.
Okay, and I think that phrase you just used is really important, right for you.
Yeah.
Just because a home has problems doesn't mean it can't be a good deal for you.
Oh, no,
You need to be informed about what those problems are, how much it's going to take in work and effort and cost to remediate those problems to make it your perfect home.
Yeah, I always share this story with people. There was a house that I assessed. It had found like structural issues with the basement walls. The people that I assessed it for, it was too much for them. They said, no, we don't want to buy the house with structural problems. Maybe a year later, our structural engineer was moving. He moved into that house. So, but I mean, he just had an understanding. He knew what the problem was. I mean, he knew that I already assessed it, so he kind of went into it with open eyes of just like, okay, this is going to be a problem, but I'll fix it. Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I was told years ago is that there are two kinds of concrete. It's either cracked or it's about to crack.
Yeah.
Because of the nature of the material, it kind of heaves and moves a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's not unusual, you know, concrete slabs, sidewalks, even foundations, to have minor cracking. How do you determine whether or not a crack on a foundation, especially one of the newer concrete ones, is minor, like we oftentimes see around like windowsills and openings, and a problem?
Well, kind of like there's concrete that's cracked and there's concrete that's going to crack. There's cracks and then there's bad cracks. So it's just like you need to have like the educated eye or kind of understand how it was built to assess the crack and figure out which one's wrong. Sometimes it's like direction of cracks. If you have a horizontal crack going along an entire basement wall, typically that indicates that wall has been pushed in or it's bowing in. So if it's standing upright and it's pushed in, it's going to open up a crack horizontally across that whole wall. So that's usually like your big uh-oh crack of something needs to be done here.
I saw one like that recently.
Yeah. The windowsill ones, sometimes that's just the way the concrete dries or just, you know, not enough rebar or something inside that system. It's not necessarily bad. It's just when you have like an inside crack, concrete's going to shrink a little bit when it dries. So when it shrinks on an inside corner, it's going to pull away, and that's where those inside corners you get cracks. Sometimes that could be mitigated with like control joints. So you'll see in like a basement slab, or not a basement, like a garage slab, or even sidewalks. The sidewalk's only 4 foot, and then there's a joint, and then 4 foot in a joint, because you're trying to force the crack to go there, not down the middle of my sidewalk. So there's ways to mitigate it, but they know it's going to crack, so they're just kind of preparing for it. So, like I said, there's cracks and there's bad cracks. So you just kind of have to get somebody to look at it and say, oh yeah, this is normal, or yeah, you might have some problems.
One question that comes to mind is, do things like vapor barriers and the types of systems we put in basements have a life expectancy? Is there a point at which they need to be repaired or replaced?
Yeah. Everything in your house has a life expectancy. So the vapor barrier is no different, and it also depends on what vapor barrier did they use. Did they use just the standard black vapor barrier that you typically see? Usually that's only like a 6 mil thick. And I mean, the difference between 6 mil and 20 mil, yeah, you could feel it, I guess, if you play around with material. It's not going to look too different to you or me, but when you start messing with it, then you're going to really see the difference. When to replace it? If it starts just deteriorating, sometimes they just, over time, they just deteriorate and they start to tear. So it's not working like plastic anymore, it just starts ripping. Or you had the HVAC system that's down there replaced, you know, a whole crew went in there, crawling all over this thing, messing it up. The HVAC system dropped on it, they pulled it, it teared, or tore, teared. But yeah, so those are issues. That's when definitely you're going to need to replace it or improve it, tape joints, try to seal it as much as you can so that you're not seeing dirt. If you're seeing dirt, then you know that's a chance for water to just kind of come up into your space.
Yeah, Tony, thanks for coming out and sharing your expertise with us. And you want to tell people how they can reach you guys for more information?
Yeah, you can either give us a call. I think we'll link our number down below. But you could also check out our website. It's luxcando.com. And yeah, thanks. Thank you for having me.